Heard me yet. How many of you is this your first time ever hearing me speak? You have no clue who I am. Quick show of hands. It's almost everyone. Okay, I actually love that. My name's Brett Ullman. Let me give you 2 minutes on me. I come from Ajax, which is a wonderful drive on a Sunday morning. I'm not crossing the city of Toronto, which is the worst thing for anyone to ever do, ever. My background is education. I'm a trained high school phys ed chemistry biology teacher who never did that. I taught rotary science in the Melbourne community of Scarborough to grade 7s and 8s for about a decade. During that time, I'd begun speaking, and speaking grew to a place where I couldn't speak and teach. So I left teaching 11 years ago, and I've now traveled full-time for 11 years. I always just say I speak on issues that I think we've forgotten to talk about in the church world. I have a talk on sexuality. How do we help parents, first and foremost, help our kids get a biblical worldview of healthy sexuality? I have a talk on pornography, which no one wants to talk about, but we need to. I have a talk on men, challenging us as men to be better fathers, husbands, and boyfriends. I have a talk on dating, a large kind of broad talk called media, faith, and culture. Not all media is good, but not all media is bad. How do we create discernment and good conversations for it? How do we get a biblical worldview? What does that mean? How do we engage the world? And this morning's talk is probably the talk that's closest to my heart. It's called The Walking Wounded, which is a talk on mental health. This talk came to be after a change in my life. Like, I left teaching, and then I went straight into a program called the Aero Leadership Program in British Columbia. Went straight from that into a master's degree at a school called Wheaton down in Chicago. As someone who's now an international student, though, my costs were incredible. So I was now speaking not 125 speaking dates a year, but 275 speaking dates a year, which is crazy. I once spoke 32 times in 14 days. And in those moments, I remember thinking, hey, I can now pay for my flight to Chicago. I can now eat while I'm in school, or I can pay for my class. But my friends, my mentors, my family, my wife, everyone said, you're burning the candle at both ends and you have nothing left. And I kept saying, I just need to make it to March 1st, 2012. Because if I make it to March 1st, 2012, I can that's when the day I'll graduate, then I can rejig my life. I already had a plan of how to kind of rebalance everything, and I made it to March 1st, 2012. And my life changed March 1st, 2012. That morning, I woke up 2 hours early, and within 2 months, I wasn't really sleeping at all. I was just kind of up throughout the night, feeling tingly and weird. I then began to have weird things happening while I was speaking. I was at a church in Woodstock, and I almost passed out in front of 500 or 600 students. There's nothing like in your head when you're like, how do I gracefully pass out? I'm 6'6". Like, I'm a big boy. Like, do I just fall over? Like, what do you do? I went to my doctor. He says, you have anxiety. I'm like, no, I speak on anxiety. He says, no, you have anxiety. And I'm like, it was this banter. And I'm like, oh, and so we began to walk some paths of that. And then I was okay for a bit. And so I went back on tour. I was doing 10 Catholic high schools in the Windsor area and found myself crying in my car one morning. And I remember saying, I'm not okay. Nothing's happening. I just am not well. Went home. I wasn't okay, and I was, and then it all kind of came to head. There's a camp in Coburg called Lakeshore Pentecostal Camp, and I was speaking there for the week. And the day before I was supposed to speak, I went boating, had a great day, and then collapsed in the McDonald's parking lot. I didn't leave the cottage for the week, didn't leave my home for 3 months, didn't speak for a year. There's irony with my journey in that I've dealt with, while I was at home, anxiety, depression, and panic attacks, which are still part of my life almost 6 years later. I sit in a chair because my anxiety manifests as dizziness, and I can't stand at a pulpit anymore. I start to sway, which the people in the front row get worried, right? Like, do they have to catch you? But I've learned that I can sit. Pope Francis said many years ago, recovery is making a life despite limitations. And I like that. And I've learned if I can sit in a chair, I can speak. And so I have a little rider that says, I need a chair. And people don't usually understand, and I've had to explain it a few times, but that's okay. Chrissy once said, this is something that needs to be talked about. It needs to be let out. It needs to be given a voice because I, among others, don't feel that we have one. What a shame it is for any of you sitting here this morning to be struggling with the same things that I do and think you're struggling alone, even though we all think we're struggling alone because we live in our heads. On this conversation of mental health, Henry Cloud, who's one of my favorite authors, says that we need to enter the danger. And I like that. Is there any conversation we can't hold up to the light of the Gospels in the Bible? There's nothing, right? We can take any conversation and walk through how do we connect our ancient faith with our modern world with anything. In my mind, though, we as the church need to change because we are not only not leaders in this conversation, we're not even at the table. I've talked to tens of thousands of people in the last decade on mental health, and I don't know more than a handful who would tell me the church was the place that they went for help. Most say the opposite. The church was the place that hurt them the most, which is just not okay. And we can walk through that conversation. We can change those conversations as well. So this is what was interesting for me. As a speaker, as a leader on this topic, I suddenly found myself at home. And people would come to my home, and pastors and leaders, and they would say, have you tried? And they would say over and over again, have you tried things? The number one thing people would say to me is, have you tried Jesus? And I would say, yeah, what do you mean by that? And they're like, you know Jesus. And I would say, I know Jesus. What do you mean by have I tried Jesus? Like it's a chocolate bar, like, right? Because that's what you're kind of saying to me. And they would look at me and go, isn't that what I'm supposed to say to you? And I'm like, I actually don't know anymore. And they would go, oh, and then they'd leave. And then I would be at home. And it was just these interesting conversations. People would say, have you tried these milkshakes? And I would be like, milkshakes are healing? Like, I didn't know that. But they weren't regular milkshakes. They were these specialty milkshakes. But this picture is what was my life. It was a million people offering me a million roads in a million directions. It was chaos. One day my wife said to me, you're going nowhere. I'd been home for 5 months. I quit speaking. I never thought I'd speak ever. I didn't leave my home. How would I ever get in front of an audience if I couldn't leave my house? I mean, the biggest thing I would leave my house for is to go to a medical appointment with the dozens of specialists who were working with me. And so I packed up my speaking stuff, and she said, listen, you're a creative. That's an interesting term. I like to create stuff. Some of you create music or art. I create what I do, these kinds of things. And she said, so create. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you need to do something because you're doing nothing. And so I thought, if I'm going to design something, I would want to design a talk to help people not go through the chaos that I went through. So I began designing a talk that I would never in my mind ever speak to people, which is the weirdest thing I've ever begun. And I never thought I would get a chance to do it. But I wanted to answer this question. What would you do if someone walked up to you today and said to you, I'm struggling with anxiety? How would you have a biblical but a practical answer to that? That's not this. And that's what I want to walk through this morning. So from an interaction standpoint, you're welcome to tweet, to which every adult in the room says, what? Listen, I'm a teacher at heart. I think we are, as Christians, we are wonderful listeners. We are horrible learners. If I said to you, what were the last 10 sermons you heard, could you tell me? How did they change your life, your faith, your practice, your anything? If you can't answer that, then I don't know what we're doing every week. Why would a pastor ever create sermons at 20, 25, 30 hours a week to speak to you that we say, and enjoy, and then just go home? There should be life change, even a little bit, right? Faith is built in moments. So I always just say you can post online. I don't really care if you do, but you can write things down, pen and papers. You can take out your phones. Most people have phones. You can take pictures of any slide that you want. And that little take-home button means that whatever is on the screen that has that, I've linked directly for you on my website. And as you walk down the stairs, you'll bump right into the table that I've set up probably, but there's a little white card for you, and you can take that home. A couple of quick ground rules. First, there's nothing that will disturb you in this talk. There's no language, there's no pictures or images. Number two, I do come from a faith-based perspective. I grew up Baptist. I married a Pentecostal. That's not supposed to happen. I do know that. Now we attend a church called C4 in Ajax, Crothers Creek Community Church. I've been there for about 13, 14 years. But I will say this with faith. Every single one of you in this room is different. You've grown up in different homes, in different denominations, in different thoughts, and different preaching styles, and nationalities, and ethnicities. Like, all these things have created in you differing opinions and thoughts on faith and healing and suffering. But what I don't want you to lose this morning is this. We're not at a Bible college class. We're not at Tyndale or Masters or whatever college you might go to. We're talking about how do we help people. And so I think sometimes we debate things, and I'm going to talk about some of the debates as well, but just don't lose the fact we're talking about real people who are hurting and broken. I'm going to give you lots of statistics. They're all wrong, every one of them, because all statistics are wrong. A statistic is just a snapshot of a time and a place in the world that doesn't even exist anymore. So if I say something's 80, somebody once yelled out, I think it's 85, and I'm like, I don't care, great, 85. Like, I mean it's a lot, or it's a little, or it's in the middle. That's it. And here's the hard one. For everyone who raised your hand, I need you to trust me. There's no weird ideology. There's no weird philosophy in what we're talking about. We're just looking at trying to connect something which is funny that isn't already connected, which is our Christian faith with mental health. And for the most part, when I speak this talk, people say to me, I've never heard the Christian faith and mental health being paired together ever, which I don't understand. So here's the morning. I want to talk about anxiety and depression, some basic first steps, deal with our faith and what it means, some thoughts, and we're done. Now, I do not have time in a short conversation in the morning to cover everything. I won't be walking through schizophrenia and bipolar and dyslexia and everything else, but the reality is that we're going to cover some of the main ones, which are depression and anxiety. There isn't a day in my life when someone on my social media feed doesn't post something that says something like this, "Oh, I'm so depressed." Does that mean that you're depressed? Because I would say, wow, you had a really bad day. What happened? Because that's the language of the day that we use. But if there's a continuum from feeling sad, like seasonal affective disorder started 1 week ago, right? It's nice in the morning, but like at 4:10 yesterday, I'm driving home and it's getting dark and I'm just like you just feel blah. Seasonal affective disorder is a mental health disorder. It affects 1 in 3 people from now until when? April. Suddenly, when it's 22 degrees, we all wander outside and rub our eyes because we've been inside for months. But is that the same as being home with clinical depression? No. How about sadness, grief, loss, death? The list, there's a million things we could talk about. Or how about anxiety? Is anxiety everyday anxiety about everyday things? If any of you had to come up and do the announcements this morning, I wonder how many of you, as you did it, your hands would shake. Because I know for students, that's just normal. For many students who get in front of an audience, right, they say people would rather die than public speak. How do you know that, right? Like, I don't think anyone knows that, but that's how much we dislike public speaking. But is that the same as panic attacks or brutal anxiety? And I would say no. So if you're questioning with depression from well to unwell, anxiety from well to unwell, when have you crossed the line? And I would say this, if you think you have, you probably have. No one's ever been at a movie and said, I think I have some anxiety, unless something's going on. No one's ever been at home and said, I think I might be depressed, unless you feel something going on in your body, your mind, and your soul. How'd it look for me? Heart palpitations for no reason. Not having a heart attack, just heart palpitations. Headaches, not eating, you just feel sick, sweating for no reason, feeling like you're going to die, fog over your life, can't think, read, or talk to people, feeling helpless, hopeless, and worthless. And for me, the bane of my existence to today is not sleeping. I have not had one night's sleep since March 1st, 2012. I wake up every night, every sleep cycle. So I'm at 1,800 nights of not having 1 6-hour sleep total. And anxiety causes sleeplessness. Sleeplessness causes anxiety, and it's kind of just a road that builds into many, many people's lives. This is an interesting article. It says, people have taken to exaggerating their everyday experiences and punctuating sentences with terminology appropriate for a psychiatrist's office. They aren't nervous about an upcoming work presentation. They have bad anxiety. They aren't uncomfortable to go to a big party where they don't know anyone. They have social anxiety. And they don't get butterflies in their stomach. They have panic attacks. Anxiety isn't cute or fashionable. It's not a word we can just overuse. It's a debilitating disorder that 40 to 50 million people in North America struggle with. Now, all of us need to be taken seriously, and we deserve that. But some people just need to use a better word to communicate how they're feeling than using words like panic attacks, bad anxiety, when you're really just feeling nervous. Sometimes it's okay to say, I feel really nervous. I felt nervous once this summer. I was speaking at, my kids go to a camp called Minneowi, and for the first time in 2,000 talks, I'm walking into not an environment where I'm the speaker, but it's my kids' camp I'm walking into, and I'm like, this is different for me. I'm walking into another, like their environment with their world, and I was so worried because my kids had to stay for the rest of the week with all the kids that I spoke to that day. I was emailed a metaphor for depression. You're stuck in a deep, dark hole in the ground. The walls are completely smooth, and you don't have anything to help you get out. Most people just walk past the hole, which is a very sad sentence. But occasionally, someone stops at the top, looks down, and asks, what's wrong? You tell them you're stuck in this hole and you can't get out, and they say, so just climb up. And you look around, and all you can say is, I can't. And they say, sure you can. And then they walk away. This was my journey in the church world, and this is not okay. We have a disconnect between what we sing, what we say, and what we do. Who we are and who we need to be are not always the same thing. As a Canadian culture, we began to talk about this heavily when Maclean's magazine did a massive poll. They polled 1,600 students at University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton. They found 51% of their students felt life was hopeless. Want to do ministry for your church? Campus ministry. For any college, apprenticeship, university, local. 51% of students at one school felt life was hopeless. Number 2, felt overwhelmed by all they had to do. It's the only one I don't care about. I have a daughter in grade 10, Zoe, and Ben's in grade 9. My daughter took the entire school year to get used to grade 9. She went from a school of, this size to like 1,700 high school students, and pause my mic, sorry. There are moments that you're overwhelmed, and that's okay, but you can't live in an overwhelmed state ongoing. That's a different conversation. Exhausted but not from physical activity, 87. Lonely, 62. Very sad, 66. So depressed it's difficult to function, 34. Overwhelming anxiety, 52. Seriously considered suicide, 7. Attempted suicide, 1. They made a premise, maybe it's just University of Alberta. I always just say, maybe the Edmonton Oilers are just so bad as a hockey team. Don't say that in Edmonton, by the way. It doesn't go over well. But the point was just, listen, they made a premise so they could pull more people. And then they pulled every college and university in Canada. And every statistic went higher. And I would put forth, in my 1-hour drive from Ajax to here, I passed dozens of high schools, businesses, churches, schools. It's every single one of them. There's no difference if I'm in a big city like Toronto or if I'm in Cold Lake, Alberta, 5 hours north of Edmonton. It's everywhere I go. I find this today. Now, I don't have time this morning to cover everything, so I've given you dozens of great clips and viral videos, and Claire Hughes and her trip across the country, a couple of programs on panic. I've had over 250 panic attacks. If you don't understand a panic attack, it's like a grenade goes off in your body, but it's emotions that's what kind of gets blown up. The Panic Away one, I remember one line from its book, which just says this: anxiety is just feelings. Anxiety is just feelings. They're misplaced feelings, but they're just feelings. How many of you have been to Wonderland before? Wonderland, quick show of hands. If you've been to Wonderland, I'm a roller coaster guy. Well, I was before this journey, but I'm a front car guy, or I'm not going on it guy. Anybody with me? So if I'm going on the Leviathan, the Behemoth, like the big roller coasters, I'm on the front car. There's literally a pad in front of me and nothing. You get on, it turns the corner, the chain grabs it, starts going tick, tick, tick. It starts dragging you to the top. What happens in that moment, and for some of you in this moment, your heart starts beating a bit faster. Your blood pressure rises. You break out in goosebumps. What's happening? A panic attack. But you paid $65 for it. What you don't want is when you're sitting right now out for lunch after, sitting in school this week or at work, and suddenly your emotions go and you're like, I don't know why this is happening. I believe that we in the church give one set of rules to people who struggle with any other ailment, cancer, sickness, and then we have a different set of rules for people with mental health. There's a couple of interesting comics. This one says, have you tried, not having the flu? Said no one ever. Right? I've had the flu, we've all had, no one's ever said to you, have you tried, not being sick? But I've had 1,000 emails of people telling me, have you tried, not having anxiety? It's like you're not even trying, says someone to a person who's like profusely bleeding. And the last one is a person giving himself an insulin shot for diabetes. And they say, I don't think it's healthy that you have to take medication every day just to feel normal. Don't you worry it's changing you from who you really are. We need to address the problem in the church world, which is this, that we often have one set of rules for one people and one for another set of people. And I don't think that's okay. We should have rules for all. Now, you might have noticed up till now, I'm not a preacher. I'm a teacher by gifting and by trade. And so for a talk like this, I've now read 250 books on mental health. I've talked to over 15,000 people who struggle, and I don't know how many hundreds of counselors. Number one question I still get to this day, at least once a week, is, I love Jesus. What about medicine? Can I? A friend of mine 3 weeks ago, pastor, is at a church where medicine is banned. Christian church, medicine is banned. And he's been struggling, and he was told he's not allowed to take meds, and he took his life 3 weeks ago. And this is not uncommon. So let's just address medicine up front. I have asthma. When I was in grade 7 and 8, I had pneumonia. It hurt my chest. And every time that it's a beautiful day, twice a year, beautiful day, clouds rush in, I suddenly can't breathe. And you then say, well, take your inhaler. I take my little blue Ventolin inhaler. I take 2 puffs. No one's ever said to me, I see you taking your inhaler. Have you ever instead considered trusting in God? No disrespect to God. I'm saying, you take your inhaler. If I don't take my inhaler, you'll be calling 911, and the ambulance will put a big mask on me, which is a really big inhaler. Antibiotics, we overprescribe, I agree, but we take them. Blood pressure medication. My father almost died on the operating table about 3 years ago from heart complications in a surgery. He needs blood pressure medication to live. Diabetes, you take your insulin, but you know there's families in Canada, Christian families, who've said, we will just anoint with oil and pray and not take insulin. By the way, anoint with oil and pray. I'm not saying don't. Remember, in everything I say today, I'm not an or, I'm an and guy. I'm adding things. There's also the family in Ontario with I think he was a 15-year-old son who he had meningitis and they gave him molasses and he died. All these parents are being charged with manslaughter. I don't think I disagree. Allergies, you buy really expensive medication at Rexall or Shoppers. Cancer, you walk through the protocols for cancer. I have 3 friends ongoing in this. I have a friend with her father's kidney. She needs transplant rejection drugs to live, sleeping pills. You take a bit of melatonin. You take too much usually. You get my point, though. No one cares. Not about you. I'm saying no one cares about what you're doing. You pursue what you need. But the moment we hit depression and anti-anxiety medications, now we have opinions. Welcome to the Christian community. Polarized opinions. And what's interesting is the opinions are kind of this. Meds are always fine. Meds are never fine. And I would just say, people often say, well, what is your opinion? And I'm like, neither of those. Because I don't have to choose. The world's not black and white. It's a million shades of gray. Do I think we over-medicate? Yes. Yes, we do. I think we so quickly just head into medication for things that I think we could sometimes deal with in other ways. But what if you need medication? I was at home for 5 months. My life was over. My day was going from my bed to the couch to the bathroom, bathroom to food, and the cycle. That was it. I did nothing. I had specialists. I've had 25 specialists to this day, ongoing, still with me. At one point, I had 5. By the way, all Christian, fascinating, mainstream environments. All my people ended up being Christians. And one day, one of my doctors said to me, because I took meds for the first 5 months of chaos, and then I didn't after my breakdown. And my doctor one day leaned back and he said, "Can I say something really unmedical to you?" I'm like, okay, sounds weird, but okay. He says, "What would you do right now if your arm is like hanging broken in front of me?" I'm like, "I'd let you cast me." He says, "Great. Your brain's broken. Let me fix you." And I remember kind of going, that's the least medical thing I've ever heard in my life, and I completely understand it for the first time. Is taking psychiatric psychotropic meds a big topic? Sure, because these meds have effects, and do they work or don't they work? Remembering meds are not a science, it's a bit of an art. If you take a round of meds, 30% of people find help, 70% do not. A few more rounds, up to years of meds, we might find 70% find help, 30% do not. I am the 30% that do not. You can't look at, I've taken 27 meds, by the way. You can't look and say, well, that med doesn't work for you, so it won't work for me. Meds that didn't help me have saved my friends' lives. And so this is not an easy conversation. I'm reading a book by a pastor, and he says, we over-medicate. I agree, and I think he understands it. And then he says, and it's been proven that all meds don't work anyways. And I'm like, oh, when did that get proven? By the way, I'm a researcher. Every med I ever took, I printed off booklets of, I got files at home. I research what's going on. And so I'm on my iPad on the Kindle app, like I read digitally for the most part, and I click on the asterisk, which will give me that study, and it just says, a study in the British Journal of Medicine. Like, you're not even going to give me the study? You're saying a massive statement. By the way, one study means nothing. I have 2 studies that say Big Macs are good for you, which people often say, could you give me that study? It's like, I'll find it later. He then goes on to say this, if you struggle with anxiety, you're a temporary atheist. Anybody here a book thrower? By the way, if you haven't thrown a book, you're reading the wrong books. Because none of us have arrived, right? We should be reading books that we question, and it makes us understand what we believe and we don't. And I'm on my iPad, so I kind of like fake through it. I'm not throwing my iPad. But I remember just sitting, feeling a little teary, and I said, he doesn't understand. If he thinks I don't trust in Jesus, he doesn't understand. So after our 3-minute conversation on meds, if you're like, Brett, I don't care what you say, meds are still wrong. Here's my response to you. That's okay. You're wrong, but that's okay. Now let me say this. You and me can have differing opinions and still be brothers and sisters in Christ. It is a really important foundational thing that we're losing in our Christian community, that if we have differing opinions, we're now not family anymore. We have tons of things we differ on. We're still brothers. This is, by the way, it's not like we believe in the Trinity, the resurrection, and not taking meds, right? This is not a foundational issue. This is so far down. But here's what I will say. It's not okay for you to shame someone who makes a different decision than you. So 2 weeks ago, I was on 100 Huntley Street, and they asked me to share my journey. I had 24 emails the next day of people telling me that it is my fault because I went on meds. And I had 12 people telling me because I took meds, I'm not a Christian. And I kind of shake my head and say, who are you people? You didn't write and say anything. You just write and shame someone who made a different decision than you. Being depressed is bad enough, but being a depressed Christian is worse. And being a depressed Christian in a church full of people who do not understand depression is like a little taste of hell. Horrible, horrible, but true. There's a view in the greater church. It's a minority view, but I see it. It's this, that Christians don't get depressed or deal with these kinds of things. If it's true, it's not. If it's true that Christians don't deal with these kinds of things, it means one of two things. One, the Christian suffering from depression is not truly depressed. Or B, the Christian suffering from depression is not truly a Christian. And if it's false, which it is, what kind of extra and unnecessary pain and guilt do we heap upon an already darkened mind and a broken heart? In my mind, we clearly call this religious abuse. The Psalms treat depression more realistically than many of today's popular books on Christianity and psychology. David and other psalmists often found themselves deeply depressed for various reasons. They did not, however, apologize for what they were feeling, nor did they ever confess it as a sin, not once. It was a legitimate part of their relationship with God, and they interacted with God through the context of their depression. Someone once yelled out at a church service, "No one in the Bible ever," and I clicked my button and he said, "Okay," and he sat down. That was the end of that conversation. Moses, Hannah, Jeremiah, Elijah, Job, David, Paul, authors of the Psalms, and of course Jesus. When Jesus says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," that's dark. Now, we can debate every one of these. What are they struggling with? How dark are they? But we don't know. My favorite is Paul. Every book I've ever read on things, Paul has it. Paul has diabetes, Paul has cancer, Paul has lupus, Paul has anxiety, Paul has depression, because we take Paul's thorn in his side. By the way, you know what we know about Paul's thorn in his side? Nothing. We know nothing. It says he had a thorn in his side, and he wanted to be taken away, and from what we read, it wasn't, and that's it. Now, I have no problem if you're struggling. I struggle, and I have no problem going, Paul had a thorn in his side, I got one in mine, and if he can persevere through it, then I can persevere. But I can't say, Paul has anxiety, like me and Paul both have anxiety. You can't just do that. So is there hope? Yes. Is that not the basis of the gospel we believe? Hope, healing, redemption, rescue. Now here's the hard part though. Do those of us who struggle always have hope? Right? Because those are different things. And I would say, no. Do I believe that today will be my first day without anxiety in 6 years? No, because I already have it. Do I believe that tonight will be my first night's sleep since 2012? 0%. Before I sleep through the night, I'm going to have to only wake up 6 times. And then maybe 5 or 4 times, and then 2 times. My wife always says she hopes for me. My counselor says we're going to work on getting you hope for hope. And it kind of sounds like the movie Inception, like how many layers of down hope are we actually drilling? Is there healing? This is a tough one. As Christians, full healing and restoration is done in heaven. Yes, no one has ever asked me that, though. No one. What people say is, my husband, my wife, my grandparent, my daughter, my son, my boyfriend, my girlfriend struggles with X. Will they be better? Will they be better soon? Now, if you, let me generalize. If I had to take 20 years as a speaker, think of a Pac-Man. You're like, who's Pac-Man? A pizza with one piece taken out. The majority of it are people who say this, I went through a journey. It was hard. It was tough. I spoke at Ullman Lodge 2 years ago, and predominantly Ullman has a lot of seniors in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. What was fascinating to me was the lineup of seniors who said to me, let me tell you my journey. You got 5 minutes? I went through 5 months, 6 months, one gentleman, 10 years, and I don't understand. Pastor, by the way, who said that. But people say we come back to almost wholeness. We don't usually say wholeness because you will never be the same person again. I will never be the same Brett that I was. Things that mattered to me don't. Things that don't matter to me did. Then you take the mouth of the Pac-Man, right? Most of that are people who say this, I'm not in crisis anymore, but I'm not better. I'm not the guy who was at home, but I'm also not better. Then there is a sliver of people. If you've ever taken a course called Mental Health First Aid, there are ailments we have that you will have forever. And you need to learn how to cope with those. And we as the church need to learn how to come alongside you and to walk alongside you. That's how we love each other in these things. And I always say too, if you get on your knees and you pray and Jesus heals you, amazing. Does Jesus heal? Yes. Do all get healed? No. And how we deal with that is the toughest conversation. Because if we blame someone for not reading their Bible enough, we head down a really abusive path. If you don't get healed, by the way, keep praying for healing. But if you don't get healed, then I would say your hope in healing will not be a singular event, it will be a lifestyle. And you'll be like, what do you mean by that? Well, let's go back to this crazy roads idea. I remember when I began to build this talk, I printed off every email I've ever got, put them all over my wall and my floor, and I said, God, help me to help people find a process that's not the chaos that I had. And I'm looking around at all the letters, and every letter said the same thing. They said that they talked to somebody, and then they got some kind of help. And I'm like, I like that. Who'd you talk to, and what did you do? Now, if everybody talked to the same person, this is easy. But you know that's not what people said. They filled dozens of pages. I talked to my dad, my mom, my sister, my brother, my uncle, my cousin, my youth worker, and I remember kind of thinking, wow. Now, of course, the people also said Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then I'm like, well, what kind of help did you do? Because if everyone did talk to everybody, but everyone just drank those really good milkshakes and everybody's fine, but again, you know it's not what people said. Everything from blood work to MRIs to Jesus and the Holy Spirit to Sabbath and sabbatical. And I'm just like, I feel dozens of pages. And I remember lying back on my floor. I'm like, I quit. If I have to come to you and say, I want you, when you struggle, to go talk to everyone and then do every crazy thing people say to you, I'm done. I'll go find another talk to do. And as I'm kind of wallowing in misery, lying on the ground, I look beside me, and one email said Jesus and one said Holy Spirit. I'm a very logistical thinker, and I'm like, oh, they're kind of the same. I kind of push things. And then I sat up and I'm like, I'm going to put things in piles. And for 3 weeks, I put things in piles. And I found 3 piles. So here's my piles. No one's ever said that to you before. That sounds really creepy in some ways. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to talk about it, and we're going to analyze, because I guarantee you some of you will not like this. I found piles of the body. I found piles of the mind, and I found piles of the soul. I'm talking thousands of emails, not 10 or 20. I think a family doctor is good for the body, a counselor is good for the mind, and God or pastors or prayer teams are good for the soul. And I'm like, I like this. As I'm doing this, I'm reading a book by Rick Warren. Whether you like Rick Warren or not, Rick Warren's church Saddleback is the leading church on planet Earth on connecting mental health with the church Christian community. This was even before his son took his life a few years ago. His church uses 7 things. And I'm like, oh, forget the 3 I have. I'm going to use his 7. First 3, by the way, are body, mind, and soul in a different order. Then I thought, my daughter at this time was in junior high, and I pictured Zoe being out at recess and one of her friends struggling with something, and she's like, physical, emotional, spiritual, vocational, and I'm like, she's not going to remember 7 things. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going back to body, mind, and soul. I like this. Somebody once said, where do you get this from? And I'm like, well, 1 Thessalonians 5:23. And may the God of peace himself sanctify you entirely, and may your spirit and soul and body be preserved complete without blame at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm like, but there's a mind that wasn't in that verse. But you all have a mind, right? Will, thinking, choices, beliefs, attitudes, emotions. And I put the mind as part of the soul, but someone said to me, no, it's part of the body. So I pulled 1,000 people. Half of you think it's part of the body, half think it's part of the soul. I'm like, oh, so I go to my first talk. My pastor says to me, by the way, no one's going to like this. I'm like, sure they will. He says, people will not like the order and the emphasis. And I'm like, there's no order. And this isn't 1, 2, and 3. So I go to my first talk, and a guy puts up his hand. He says, can I ask you a question? I'm like, sure. He says, 1 Thessalonians says soul and spirit. Why did you just scratch off spirit and just use soul? I took a breath. I said, Masters of Divinity? He goes, yeah. I said, tripartite theology debate? He said, yeah. I said, does anyone in the room understand what we're talking about? I don't. I read 1 book on it. And I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Fine. Soul and spirit. He looked happy when I said that. But I don't like this anymore. Now it's like a Christmas tree. It's a little different. I go to my next talk, and someone says to me, puts up his hand, I'm like, yes. He goes, I'm so angry right now. I said, why? He says, why is Jesus last? And this took me a second. Because I had to think, and I'm like, wait, you think this is Jesus? You think this is do this, and if there's anything left, do this. And And he said, yes. I said, okay. I said, first off, this is not an, or it's like 3 circles. And I said, can I ask you a question? He said, yeah. I said, if someone takes insulin for diabetes, do you think Jesus is up in heaven saying, oh no, I'm last? He said, I don't know. Can we debate better as Christians? Like, I don't know is not a good debate. I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Fine. Jesus is first. So now it's soul and spirit, mind and body. I go to my 3rd talk, and someone says, I'm so angry with you right now. I'm like, why are people always angry with me? You know what he literally says? Why isn't Jesus bigger? I'm like, I quit. Fine. Big Jesus, small mind. First off, laugh away, because it is a joke, right? It becomes a joke. But I will say one thing. Do you know who's never laughed about this concept? People struggling. Not once was I ever at home saying, what category am I in? What category is bigger? I just said, help me. This is this. This is a Bible college class. You want this? Go take a Bible college class. What I'm talking about today is, what do you do after the service when someone walks up and says, my hand's shaking, I don't really know why? Do we have an answer for that? And I would say, your issue might be physical, so go see a doctor. It might be mental, psychological, emotional, go see a counselor, and it might be spiritual. Therefore, we talk to God, pastors, and prayer teams. You cannot stare at someone and diagnose them for every ailment in the world. If you can, I'd love to see that. Like, it's just, you can't, I can't just go, oh, you have this, oh, you have, like, that's not how it works. You might be like saying, well, how does this work in my life? Well, this was my journey, won't be yours. I had a physical done, I had blood work done. Anybody here been to a sleep specialist before? Quick show of hands. Oh, you guys, a lot of you. So you know this then. They stick a bunch of electrodes all over your body and they're like, good night. They told me I had fragmented sleep. I have friends who've been told you have sleep apnea. They got a CPAP machine and they're doing well. So you look at body, mind, and soul, just a sleep specialist has fixed their issue. Medicine, I'm still taking some sorts of medicines, not like I used to. CAT scan, I had an MRI because my brain doctor, my neurologist, one day leaned back in his chair and said, I went to a brain doctor because my anxiety manifests as dizziness. And the question was, is it something related to brain functioning? He leaned back and said, I wonder if you have a brain tumor. And I said, what? And he said, oh, sorry, I said that out loud. I'm like, you just said to the guy with an anxiety disorder, hey, you might also have a brain tumor. I slept less than I was sleeping for 2 weeks before the MRI came negative. I've read the best books in the world by authors who are Christian and those who are not. I read the best books in the world. I have a naturopath to this day, a nutritionist, referrals, and allergist. All I would say is this. Some of the things you might be struggling with might be natural consequences to your unsustainable life. Working 80 hours a week is not a badge of honor. It's not. Something will break your marriage, your relationships, your faith, for me, part of my body. So take back control of what you can. Exercise, sleep, diet, pace of life, overscheduling, and for everyone, you should exercise more. We're the most lazy, lethargic generation to ever walk the face of planet Earth. You're like, what should I do? I don't care. My wife does Zumba. I don't even know what that is. I used to run. I'm injured now. I swim. Find something. Walk every day. Do something. Sleep more. Stop binge watching Netflix TV shows and go to bed. Netflix said this week in an interview, their biggest competition in the world is sleep. Isn't that fascinating? Someone asked them, who's your biggest competition? What companies? And they said, no, our biggest competition is sleep. And he said, and we're winning. He was actually speaking in talking about binge watching and how people now binge watch a show over like one day. Sleep more. By the way, who watches more TV in the room, students or adults? Anybody want to guess? Adults. Every 10 years older we watch more TV. And just eat better. I'm not saying everyone has to become paleo or whatever diet you want to talk about. I'm just saying better. How much better? 5%. Like, that's a joke. Yeah, that's why I said 5%. 5% you can do. You can go from burger, fries, and a Pepsi to burger, salad, and a club soda. You could even do burger, fries, and just change the pot. Like, you can change something little. While you're doing this, do this. Go see a counselor. Get your perspective changed. I thought I only had one road, which is I'd be worse and bad forever. I didn't realize there was even an option here. I was given framework of how to kind of go from the bottom. I sound like Drake, when the bottom to go to the top. It's a song. But just when you're not doing well, how to kind of build yourself back up. Pace of life. No one had to tell me to not speak 275 speaking dates. Are there weeks that I have busy weeks? Yes. I was on a tour with World Vision last year, but I'm very good now at rebalancing my life. Support for my emotions, care for my family, anxiety management, referrals, psychiatry. By the way, having fun. If you're grade 12 and above, you stop having fun. And I would say, have fun. I was asked once, what do I do for fun? You know what I said to my doctor? I don't know. I don't know. Like, I said, I work. They're like, and then someone says, I said, I run. And they're like, run? Like, that's not, like, what do you do for fun? And I couldn't answer them. Now, some of you look at this word psychiatry and say, well, that's not Christian. And I would just say, does psychiatry come from a different worldview than we have as Christians? Yes. Does it mean it's all wrong? No. This idea that everything Christian is good and everything secular is bad is not true. So, but we do have to question as Christians that as Christians, we have a biblical worldview. The world around us has a different worldview. So we have to question everything: music, movies, television, even psychiatry. Can we accept that philosophy? Yes. Should we reject that philosophy? No. Or can we kind of redeem it, modify it, change it? While you're doing this, do this. Pray. Study. Worship. Worship's a choice. By the way, this is easy. This is not. Did you get that analogy? This in worship is easy. This in your life is not. God, I give you my money, my relationships, my struggles, my addictions, my all. That's a hard thing to do. Sabbath, have one, says the hypocrite who had a breakdown due to stress. You know how many Sabbaths I had in 10 years? 0. By the way, anyone who's involved, I know my worship team was at our church at 6 a.m. today for our 2 services. They leave about 2 o'clock. That's not a Sabbath. For anyone who preaches or speaks, it's not a Sabbath. Like today, I've spoken, I think this is my 13th Sunday in a row. So someone said to me, well, you have no Sabbath. And I'm like, okay, I don't have my Sabbath on our Sabbath, but I have a day off. I have a day of faith and family and friends, and I'm very intentional on that. Living in the tension we'll come back to. Spiritual disciplines: read, pray, fast, study, give, serve, spiritual direction, restoration, prayer. Our circumstances will never alter the character of God. God is God, and we are not. How about we say in these seasons, I don't understand, but Jesus, help me learn something in these moments. I put up verses all over my house. How about Nahum 1:7? The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. Make sure, though, you don't cherry pick verses. Do you understand that terminology? We're not just picking a verse out of the Bible. It's like we pick like Jeremiah 29:11 and put it on a t-shirt. Nahum 1:8 says, but with an overflowing flood, he will make a complete end of Nineveh. And you're like, oh, maybe that doesn't mean the exact same thing I think it means. I'm not saying we can't use verses. I'm just saying just don't hand-pick verses. I can pick weird verses out of throughout the Bible, and you're like, that has no context to it. We need a context. The goal was to take chaos and to make it something we understand. I like body, mind, and soul. How many of you are counselors, by the way? Quick show of hands. Actual counselors. 1, 2, 3 maybe. Great. You guys can counsel. No one else can. Me neither. I'm not a counselor. I'm debating on going back for a second master's degree, which I don't know if that's a good idea or not. But if you were a counselor, you can counsel. The rest of us can give good counsel. Oh, that's confusing, isn't it? Because that's what the Bible says. That doesn't mean you counsel people. Let me give you an example. My daughter comes home a couple years ago, and she comes in the house, she's weeping. I'm like, who did it? I'll kill him. Like, I'm a dad, right? And she said, like, one of my best friends is struggling with, we have no kids in the room, struggling with cutting. I took a big breath, and I'm like, she's weeping, so she's sitting down and rubbing her back, and she literally says, if I only knew someone who talks on these kinds of things. What? And I'm like, I'll remind her later. And then she said the line that I'll never forget. She said, I need to fix her. I said, do you want to know what you need to do? She said, fix her. I said, do you want to really know what you need to do in this situation? She said, yeah. I said, you need to love her. I said, you're a teenager. I said, I'm in my 40s. I will set in motion getting the people around her that if she wants healing, she can begin down that road. It's going to be a long road, but you're not, like, you love her. For anyone in this church, if someone walks up to you and says, I'm struggling with something, you're not walking through what to do with suicidal tendencies and other, like, you can say, have you been to your doctor? I'll take you. I'll go with you. Have you been to a counselor? I know a great counselor. I've sat in counseling sessions for some of my best friends for the first 10 minutes until they feel comfortable. The counselor says, can Brett leave? And they go, yeah. And then, right, you can do that. Or talk to your pastor, talk to your prayer teams and pray with them. Like, we can do those things. It gives you a way to walk towards healing, but you're not walking Like, you can't, right? We as parents and leaders are coaches. You're not actually in the game, right? We need other people to do that. How does faith play a role? I guess the question is, do we trust God is who he says he is? Even if we struggle, even if we will struggle forever. By the way, you might not feel God's unconditional love for you. That's okay. It also doesn't mean it's not true. I spent years struggling with attention. Attention is the idea of two kind of opposing thoughts that you hold in tension. I was researching the conversations on suffering because I heard nothing about it in our current church. I'm reading books by authors 300 years old, 400 years old, 500 years old. I don't find much today. And my debate was, my favorite book of the Bible is Ecclesiastes, Time and Chance. And I'm like, I did this to myself. This is just what happened. And then I'm reading throughout Scripture, Amos, Timothy, 1 Peter, Revelation, verses that say things, and I'm paraphrasing all of them in one, like, God tests his people and his prophets to know what's in their heart. It's good for me to be afflicted. Like, you're like, I don't like these verses at all. But they're there. And then I read a book which changed my research on suffering. I stopped. It says, why do we suffer? There's 5 reasons, says Richard Winter. 1, Genesis 3. Genesis 3, we are in a fallen world and we are deeply affected by it. I'm at a funeral once. 2 teenage girls driving home from university hit black ice, car spun out of control, both died. And the mom said to me after one of these talks, she said, I was so worried you're just going to tell me God wants his angels home. By the way, it's just not even biblical. But we say things at funerals because we want to give solace, but sometimes they actually hurt more. But we're deeply affected by the world. One of my board members died of a heart attack 2 years ago, 41, out of the blue. His wife is lupus. He's her caregiver. Do you ever just say, God, I don't understand? Number 2, we live with the effects of others' sins. My best friend growing up was a guy named Warren Parker. Warren was a Southern gospel musician who was killed on tour. And we've lived with that for 10, 11 years. Same with his wife. We live with our own sinful nature. I said to every person who challenged me, I will be fine. I was wrong. Now, here's the problem. I often say to myself, if I could go back, I would change it. But here's the problem with that. Even if I did change it, there's nothing to say that this still wouldn't have happened to me. Right? Like, I still would like the chance to go back, but it doesn't mean that I wouldn't have had the same journey. Number 4, now this is a big thing in our church world, and I address it because I don't want to not address it. We either address it too much or we address it too little, but you can't throw Ephesians 6:12 out of the Bible. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world. If we believe in Jesus and angels in heaven, there's Satan and the demonic, but can I just challenge you as parents, don't go here right away. It's a spoke on the wheel, but it's not the wheel. The number of 15-year-old girls who write me and say, my mom says I'm demonized, then you go and you have low iron. It's just like, we so quickly head down that spiritual path. And last is God's discipline and discipleship. And you might say, well, which one are you, Brett? Which one of these are you now? And here's a new response I've had for the last few years. I actually don't know, and I actually don't care. My life, my health, my ministry, my all are for his kingdom, his rule, his reign, his all. So whether I did it, he did it, something happened, I don't know. But I know I couldn't have sat here 6 years ago and had a conversation on mental health like I can today. So what do you do in this place? Number 1 verse people say is Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purposes. Genesis 22, Abraham just says, here I am. N.T. Wright says, the world is still groaning and we with it. Now here's the problem with Romans 8:28. It is so important that we read this promise carefully. Because I grew up at a very traditional, legalistic church, and one day here was my youth group night. We had a man in our church who was in a car accident. In that accident, his fault, his wife and daughters were killed. Can you imagine? Like, I can't. Lost his job, streets of Toronto, died homeless. And here's my youth group night. It's a promise that we will all be good, so where's the good? And I'm like, I don't think that's what, it is not good. This isn't good. We can't make it say more than it actually says. Paul does not tell us that all things are good. Life will not be good. People will die in car accidents, heart attacks, disease. Is God still God in those devastating things? Yes. Did these people only need to pray more or read their Bible more and they would be okay? No, that is not proper theology. I have a friend of mine whose father died, and when he did, the church said that the family didn't pray enough. 30 years later, still brings him just to his tears when he talks about it. If you look at people in the Bible, John the Baptist was beheaded. That's not good. Jesus was murdered. The disciples, for the most part, were murdered and martyred. Someone once yelled out, what about Job? And I'm like, Job's a great story. We watched Job be destroyed and come back up, but I would always respond this, what about Job's family? You know, the guy who yelled out, he said to me, what do you mean Job's family? And I'm like, how dare you yell out, what about Job, and miss the one verse which says, and the wind came and the house fell and Job's family died. I often feel more like Job's family in my journey, forgotten. Just forgotten, right? The verse we just kind of pass on by. Is God's kingdom moving towards its end in Revelation? Yes. Is it good? Yes. Will all of life be good? No. Remember, too, our good and God's ultimate good are things that are going to probably be different. Meaning the best translation of this verse is, in all things, God's working for the good of those who love Him. In other words, whatever your circumstances, however they happened, God is still fighting along with you for good. Remembering, that's actually a verb, working along with. Now, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. We don't do this one well. I'm at an event called Missions Fest a few years ago, and a man stands up and calls me satanic in the middle of my talk. Takes 12 people with him, and they leave and pray against me for the rest of my talk. In the things we agree on, unity. In the things we disagree on, liberty. But in all things, love. But at some point, we don't serve the same God. Or someone's really misled. I dealt with the destruction afterwards. The dozens of people weeping, saying, this is my church. The vitriol, the cruel and bitter criticism I see is palpable in churches on a weekly basis. If your opinions on anything leave destruction, the Bible says to guard your tongue. By the way, tears are okay. There's a difference between tears of whatever, pain or hurt or sadness, and tears of I've beaten you down as a speaker and you just feel, like that's a different conversation. If you need your arm casted, you go to a doctor. If you have cancer, you go to a doctor. If you go to trees falling on your car, it's not really a faith issue. It's a who's got a chainsaw issue. If your house is burning, we call 911. If you need some help with occupational therapy, personal training, we hire someone. If you have tax trouble, we hire a tax consultant. Why can't people who struggle with mental health do those same things? And I think 3 reasons. 1, we don't talk about it enough. 2, we actually believe that the mind is not fallen, which is not biblical. And 3, we believe that everything is spiritually rooted. And I would say it's a spoke in the wheel, but it's not the wheel. It was 3 weeks after this man calls me satanic. I'm at another talk, and a man walks up and says, man, he's 18, 19, and he says, I was one of those guys who left and prayed against you. And I'm like, what's up? Like, what do you say? I didn't even know what to say to him. I'm like, why am I satanic? He goes, counseling. I said, what about counseling? He says, counseling's evil. I said, why? He said, I don't know, it just is. I'm like, you think I'm satanic, but you don't even have a basis? Like, that's a pretty big word to say. You're not a Jesus follower. You're a Satan follower with no backing. So we chatted for a few minutes. He told me his horrible life that he's had. And I said, how do you deal with this? He says, me and my pastor go for breakfast every week. I said, your pastor counsels you then? He says, yeah. So I said, so you believe in counseling then? You ever heard, if you don't look up and to the left, you'll never change? Up and to the left is your thinking, right? He thought, turned around and walked away. I'm like, I think we believe in the same thing. But it's language. In these journeys, some people say it's like Jesus meets you in the clouds. Some say it's the darkest room. Mine, I wish it wasn't, but mine's been a really dark journey. We call this a dark night of the soul. Remember, in life, you are known by your fruits. You are not known by your feelings. You're known by your fruits. Someone once said, like, raspberries? No, not raspberries. This is talking about the good things in your life. I once said to my counselor, I don't feel God like I used to anymore. And her response was, you're depressed, right? I said, yeah. She said, do you connect with your wife in that feeling way? No. Kids? No. Friends? No. Anyone? No. And she said the most freeing thing ever. She said, you're okay. You're okay. She said, when you struggle, and anyone who struggles knows this, it's like you, a wall, and Jesus. The connection, the feelings thing. By the way, isn't it weird? None of you have ever said, I have a feeling in God. What do you say? I have a faith in God. But the moment you don't have a feeling, you now question your faith. That's the definition of faith. Faith in the unseen, faith in the unknown. Tim Keller says, faith is not primarily a function of how you feel. It's living out, trusting, and believing what truth is despite what you feel. 2 slides if you're taking pictures, the next 2. What did I need? Well, I'm going to tell you what I often got. Now, I'm going to challenge you to never say some things again. And I know some of you say these things, but I just want to challenge you to never say them again. And I know some of you say these things with the right heart because we don't know what to do. I think we need to stop saying everything happens for a reason because I don't believe it's biblical. Now, I've had an opportunity to travel throughout the world on humanitarian trips. My wife was on a ship called the Mercy Ship, so traveling, floating hospitals, a nurse. I've held kids who've died of no food 2 hours later. No one says everything happens for a reason in Nicaragua, Guatemala, Africa. No one today, if a church is bombed in Egypt, the wars in Syria, everything happens for a reason is a Western construct. Now, even if you believe it is true, I would challenge you not to say it to someone. Because what you do is you throw this lifeline to someone saying everything happens for a reason, and then you walk away leaving the hurting person to figure out what that reason is. So even if you believe it, I would still say don't say it. God must have something amazing planned for you. By the way, could be true. But don't tell someone on their darkest day, guess who's doing this to you? God is. It makes people say, then I hate God. And I think you're responsible for walking people down a thought process that's unnecessary. Are you still reading your Bible? I get this all the time. They say 80% of Christians don't read their Bible Sunday to Sunday, by the way. Another talk for another day. I've had over 250 people tell me God spoke to me about what's wrong with you. One lady said I have lead paint poisoning because of my third world travels. And I'm like, I live in Hampton Inns most of my life, and I speak predominantly in Canada. She just turned around and walked away. God won't give you more than you can handle. Just so you know, this isn't in the Bible. You can't take the verse that says you won't be tempted more than you can handle and change it to you won't be given more in life than what you can handle. They're different verses. Well, one not even being in the Bible, different things. I think many of us live with more than we can handle every day of our lives. Many, many people do. One pastor once said to me, by his stripes we're healed. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, by his stripes we're healed. So you just repeated the same thing. I said, are you talking about Isaiah or 1 Peter? And I said, I believe that's actually talking about not a physical healing, but a spiritual healing. But I said, are you just telling me that I'm missing something, that if I was doing something more, I would be better? And he didn't know what to say. Don't assume health. People often say, is there sin in your life? And I'm like, oh yeah, lots. And then they don't know what to say. Have you tried praying something demonic? And please don't just say you will be okay. Do you know why? Because we don't know. Eternally, will we be okay? There's a different conversation. But will you be, we say to someone hurting, you'll be fine, and people look at you and go, how on earth do you know that? Here's what I want you to say. Say, how are you today? Today changes everything. Because I can answer today. If you walk past me later today and I'm at the gym, which I'll be at this afternoon, I walk past someone and they go, hey, what's up? And I'm like, not much, you? And we walk, is that what you're saying? We're just passing one another? Or are you saying, how are you? Do you even know that I've had a health journey for 6 years? But ask. Say I'm praying for you, and then actually do it. Because if you don't have a system for praying for people, you will never do it. I'll say praying for you, and then we'll walk away. I use an app called Evernote. You can use whatever you want, even a piece of paper, but write down prayer requests, the date, what's going on. I even write down a phone number so I can text you. Say one of the next 4 things, but you know what? The last one is the most important. Say something. Say anything. I have friends and family who don't address this with me, ever. I don't understand. You can say something about my journey. Give them a hug, not a creepy hug, just a hug. Sit with them, listen to their journey, ask how is your struggle going. Now, this is a really important one. Please know that anyone who's struggling with anything doesn't mind being asked, how are you doing? I'm at a church. It's not my church, and I know the woman struggles. She has breast cancer, and so as she walked by, I said, hey, how's your breast cancer? She bursts out crying. Pastor beside me punches me in the arm, says, you can't ask someone how their breast cancer is. It's just like flurry of stuff happening. She yells at him. He's the first person to ask me in 2 years how I'm doing. How? We sing about being the family of, how am I the first person in 2 years to ask you how you're doing? Where is your small group? Where are just the people around you in church on a Sunday? You can ask anytime how people are doing. Talk about something else. You're all looking at shawarma going, shawarma's healing? Yes, it is. Food is healing, though. Darkest day of my life. Remember, suicide is wanting your pain to end so bad you're willing to take your life. I've lived on that line. I've never crossed it. Very lucky that I haven't. Darkest day of my life. I'm sitting on a floor alone. My wife's at work. My kids are at school. My mind's going down the rabbit hole, thinking Alice in Wonderland. And I get a call from one of my board members. His wife says, do you want, she switches, I'm getting you shawarma. I'll be there soon. We have a place in Ajax, if you're ever going through, called Pita Delights. It is a Christian family from Nazareth. You want Middle Eastern food? Like, when I walk in and I want like baba ganoush, hummus, and tabbouleh, my lad looks at me and says, "Brother Brett," there's 30 people in line. He looks down and waves. I took a bite of that shawarma that day, and I just smiled and I went, there's something about food. There's something I miss most from my Baptist roots. It's potluck Wednesdays. You know why? Because I got a chance to meet people in my church. Because you meet people over food. So if someone's struggling, know what they like. Is it cheese pizza from Pizza Hut? Is it a Big Mac? I don't care, right? The point is, the people who brought me something that I liked in those moments, there's something about food. 2 Corinthians 1:3, who comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Some thoughts and we're done. Please advocate for each other. Stand in the gap for people who can't stand in the gap for themselves. Who are you advocating for? By the way, we often speak from fear. We often speak about being against things and not for things, but we often ignore, don't support, defend, and argue for people who are struggling. Now, I posted this on my wall. I just say it gracefully to you. Some of you might need to stop being a victim. Some of you need to stop making this your identity or wallowing in misery. There's a quote that says, "Your story may not have such a happy beginning, but that doesn't make you who you are. It's the rest of your story, who you choose to be." Now, the rest of that line says, "So who are you, Panda?" Because it's from the movie Kung Fu Panda 2. By the way, humor is really important, and you can laugh even when you're struggling. If one door's not working, choose another. One counselor's not working, choose another. One medicine's not working, choose another. One exercise is not working, choose another. If you're a bit older, I'm 46, Bruce Cockburn used to sing many years ago, "To kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight." This is a fight. So fight. We have so much apathy in our world today. Just, you're not well, what are you doing? Nothing. I say to people, they've come to my talks, I'm like, have you been to a doctor, a counselor, or like prayed? And they're like, none of it. I'm like, what? Like, we're stuck, right? Just start moving. If you choose to stay where you're at, you're choosing to stay where you are. Like, you have to do something. Now, this is not half empty or half full. This is, how long do you hold it? 5 minutes, irrelevant. 5 days, paralyzed. It's the same with your darkness. The longer you think on and dwell on and talk about the darkness, the darker it gets. And I'm just saying, put it down. I'm not saying you're better. But you can't spend every waking moment, I can't spend every day of my life going, I didn't sleep again last night. My anxiety is bad. You just can't. You need to put it down. And as Winston Churchill said many years ago, never, never, never give up. Ever. For friends and family, if it's not you struggling, one person said to me, well, it's my wife or my daughter. I would say very simply, go see a counselor. Someone yelled out once, counseling's for the weak. And I said very quickly, no, counseling's for the strong. Weak people do nothing. Do you ever speak really quick? And I'm like, whoa, hold on a sec. I think I had 1,000 people there. I'm like, wait a sec. And I'm like, actually, I stand by what I said. Now, here's what's interesting. Weak people do nothing, but it's an easy weakness to switch. Just book an appointment with a counselor and you've changed that, right? Like, saying I'm not well or something I'm struggling with and I want to get better is an incredible strength. And if your family, your spouse, your child, your parent struggles with this, go see a counselor once and say, my dad struggles with anxiety. I know one family who went without their dad and just said, how can we as a family support our dad through his mental health journey? And that just makes me teary because I'm like, that is living out, to me, Christian community. Some resources and we're done. My website's just brettallman.com. If you click on where it says the talks, I can't get to it. It's going to be behind the speaker at the top. It says the talks. It will drop down. I only have 6 talks. I'm making a new one right now, which will be 7. But click on the Walking Wounded. There's a button that says Take Home. That white bar, the end of it on my side says mental health. You'll find 3 years of mental health blogs. 3 years. Now, I'm making a new talk on parenting, so I'm posting 1 or 2 parenting articles a day because that's all I've been researching. You can sign up for my blog. My social media is there. You're like, why would I want to follow you on social media? Because I post every day of my life on the topics that most people say, I don't know how to connect my faith with my world with that. My media talk for book form for students. I have one for parents and leaders as well. I have a book on mental health I wrote with a pastor at People's Church in Toronto and Dr. Mary Lynn, who's a clinical psychologist. It is the things about mental health. Eating disorders, self-harm, depression. I wrote this before my breakdown, though. So this talk is actually a different conversation. In my book, Reset, I was asked to write up my breakdown in book form by a guy once who called me. He said, I've never heard a Christian's perspective on a breakdown. And I laughed and I went, neither have I. And so he said, well, why don't you write yours? And then we'll actually have someone to read. And so I wrote my journey. Kerry Newhoff, some of you might know, is a pastor at Connexus Church, and he wrote his journey. And then 18 of my friends wrote theirs. Cancer, miscarriages, right? Suffering and pain that lead to hope and healing and redemption. I have my talks on mental health, pornography. Sexuality is how do we help our kids get a biblical worldview of sexuality. The man talk is us as husbands and fathers. 2 slides. If you struggle, I would challenge you to print this off and put it beside your bed. Great courage with great care. There are days, I have bad days. I have really bad sleeps, and I get up and I'm like, I got to speak twice today. Great courage. Get up, shower, eat some food, put your clothes on, maybe a different order, but go and do what you need to do. And then great care. Do you even know what great care is for you? What works for you? When I go home today, I will spend time with my family. I will probably play a game of Settlers tonight. Great board game, by the way. I'm going to go to the gym because I know exercise is paramount in my journey. I might cook a really good meal. I might go for a walk. What works for you? Great care. As we finish, I would just say this. For many of you, this talk, all these resources, all these emotions, all these struggles is really overwhelming. That's okay. It's okay to talk about things that we struggle with. But I want you to slow everything down as we finish. What is one thing that you can do to start? What is one thing? Remembering you can only do what you can do. You can eat better. You can exercise and sleep. Pace of life, overscheduling. You can have everyone around you do what they can do. Parents, spouse, pastors, counselors, teachers. And then allow Father, Son, and Spirit to move in this journey as well. Our goal this morning was to move you or to push you farther along the path of hope, healing, redemption, and rescue, or to give you some tips and tools to help the people that we love. I hope it's done that. If you want to chat, I'll be at the bottom of the stairs, probably blocking your way out anyways. But if you want to chat, you can do that. You can always send me an email as well. Thank you so much for having me out. Have a good day. Bye-bye.